Welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP, you're going to get 20% off your order with that code FNP at simbody.com. You're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks Kicks.
Oh boy, and we're back and we're set with a little bit of a new look, getting ready for UFC Vegas 56. It's Volkov versus Rozenstruik in that big time main event. And listen, the chat is already popping off. Charles is over there, just my 2 cents. Todd, there's Kicks Good, there's Rob G, there's Starsmith77, D-Rod, DeOne, Jack Lawson.
It's early in the day. I'm very happy to see you all here.
Yeah, it is a noon hour for those of you that are on the Atlantic time zone. Listen, Matt, I even invested in the props. I got the popcorn out. I got the pop. We got Damari Sims in the super chat saying, let's get into it. I have birch beer for the pop. Matt, do you enjoy the birch beer?
It's okay.
I'll
go out of my way for it.
It's one of my favorite sodas, but we are getting set for a fight
where... Who says
where...
soda in Atlantic, Canada?
Alexander Volkov's taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik in that main event, and it is one of those interesting heavyweight clashes where you have top 10 guys that are at the bottom of the top 10 with some fighting styles that can be exciting, but sometimes it becomes a waiting game.
And that's what I really like about this main event. We're not looking at Volkov and Rozenstruik and saying to ourselves, okay, the winner of this is going to be in the UFC Hall of Fame. It's just a fun stylistic matchup. And like you said, these are two guys in the top 10, but we have seen them lose to sort of the upper echelon levels of talent in the UFC. But for Rozenstruik, we know he can carry his power late into fights. I haven't been able to stop talking about that Alistair Overeem fight all week because that really was wild when you think about it. Like, how often do we see a heavyweight lose pretty much every second of a fight, all 24 minutes and like 59 seconds of it, and then automatically just pull out a crazy knockout out of his back pocket? Like, normally heavyweights start out strong and then get really tired. I think this could be one of those unique fights where it could be good in the first round and good in the fifth round.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones, you look at that win that Rozenstruik was able to get over Overeem, like your guy Kawhi Leonard, just right at the end, and then it's bouncing, it's going in for Rozenstruik. He was able to get that crazy win at the end of that fight, and I see it up there. I mean, Till the Next Life saying this will be both their last main events. I don't really know about that one, so we'll see how it goes. But as you know, with Fight Night Picks with Kicks, we throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen. Now, I am going to say this before we do. I haven't changed either of the two selections, but I will say one of the two has changed a lot, and I even made a video changing it. Now, Matt, the first one, Danige Movsar Evloev, and it seems like a lot of people aren't on board that this is going to be a fight of the night, but I think it is. I really like this fight, especially 3 rounds of it.
Whoever's disagreeing with us has got to get their mind right. Here's the thing about this fight. It's going to teach us a lot about Movsar Evloev, who is an undefeated, basically uber prospect. And I don't think that's ever a bad fight, because for Danige, yes, he's lost against some really good fighters, but he's never been absolutely destroyed by them. Like, even the Josh Emmett fight, he gets hurt in that, he rallies back later on, he makes a really good fight out of it. Calvin Kattar outboxes him, same thing with the Korean Zombie, but still, those are very, very good fighters, and we don't really know where Movsar Evloev fits in this whole division, so I'm extremely excited for this co-main event.
Kicks Good saying Ige can beat him. Kicks Good, Ige can definitely beat him. Clay hanging out in the chat. Justin Franks, MPTV, Angel, or is it on Hell? I will tell you this. He's saying Ige all day, and Justin Franks with Moz is a tough cookie. Go ahead.
Just, before we do get to the next one, I have seen a lot of support for Dan Ige, who is a very big underdog, and I know we get this a lot when you have sort of the unknown commodity in Movsar Evloev. He hasn't fought anyone of this level yet, but I have seen a lot of people bring up some really good reasons for why Dan Ige can have success in this matchup.
All right, so when we're talking about good opportunities for guys coming in, hey, so what's your record? I mean, I've got it record is 19-12. Askar Mazharov threw it out there in his Instagram story. He said Sherdog was against him. There were mean conspirators
If
out there.
Movsar and Uriah Faber ever got into a room together and Uriah Faber was like, check the record, bud, how worried would Movsar be? Be like, please don't check Askar, sorry. How worried would Askar be? Be like, please do not check my record for the love of God.
So it was 25-7 on some sites. Now, I said it in the friggin' video. I said, this guy's changed his name before, and UFC stats have his record as 21-8. And then all of a sudden it was, 21-12, and then 19-12.
Undergone some changes.
And the UFC's going with 19-12. And Askar Mazarov's kind of saying, they call me the Ukrainian Conor McGregor. And this is how I bet it goes. Askar's talking to his buddy, who's also Ukrainian, and he goes, hey, they call me the Ukrainian Conor McGregor. And his buddy goes, they call you the Ukrainian Conor McGregor? That counts as somebody saying, well, he called me the Ukrainian Conor McGregor. So that's what he's going by because he has the tattoos. But he's like, no, they're not Conor's tattoos. They're my tattoos. They're different. He's taking on Alonzo Menafield, the 34-year-old prospect, because prospects can be 34.
They never die in MMA.
The kid's steady, and he can mix in a couple of different things. So I'm eager for this fight, and I have it as a fight of the night because Menafield can crack. We've seen that in the past. Mazharov, record or not, he can crack as well. But he is a live or die by the sword quick guy.
Oh, and that's the thing. No matter what his record is, his style still remains the same. And it's exactly what you said. He will live by his aggression and he will die by his aggression at the UFC level. And honestly, this should be elevated to like the only fight of the night because of all the question marks around it. I'm more excited for this fight now with all the controversy throughout this week than I was at the start of the week. For Askar, like, this is a huge opportunity. This is probably going to be one of those like one and dones if he does lose because with all the, I don't even know what you want to call it, just controversy for lack of a better term, around his whole record, I really doubt the UFC would give him another chance if he doesn't look very good against Alonzo Menafield. And now that we are kind of thinking about it, being 19-12 with your first fight in the UFC being against a guy like Alonzo Menafield, like, that's a pretty tough ask for anybody.
There's a 19-12 guy and a 4-3 guy on a UFC main card. I threw that one out there on Twitter yesterday, but it is
We're here to break
something.
it down.
It is not 1998. It's 2002. Kicks good. Alonzo knockout of the night. K33K. I'm kind of liking Askar for an underdog. And that is one of those things. His line has changed at about 100 points from when the story started to break that his record wasn't really what we thought it was to now, which is crazy because if you like Menafield before and you like him at like a minus 270, it doesn't change the fighting style of the fighter, right? So it's kind of weird.
I'm glad that you brought that point up because for Menafield, I feel like some people have sort of elevated him now, and I just don't see it. Like, Alonzo Menafield is a well-rounded fighter. He's a steady fighter, but nothing he does really wows me, and I really do feel like people have tried to been talking themselves into that Alonzo Menafield pick as the week's gone on. So I think it will be a very fun fight. It should be a competitive fight. Again, we don't put fights on the fight of the night screen because we think they're just going to be one-sided beatdowns, so hopefully both those fights will end up being entertaining.
Phoenix saying up there earlier in the comment section, he's like the Ukrainian Jordan Wright. I think that is a spot-on comparison. But listen, what we always do with question mark kicks, we start from the bottom of the card. Matt, the first fight on the card, we have Erin Blanchfield taking on JJ Aldrich. One of the commenters out there this week threw it out, actually it was today, and said, for a high-level jiu-jitsu player, why doesn't Erin Blanchfield have any submission wins? Good question. Good submission defense against her opponents. But if you look at it, I mean, take, for instance, the double head kick, the one, and then Leonardo doesn't bring her hand up to block the second one, and Blanchfield ends up with a knockout. She's really added some tools to her tool belt, but when it comes to her ground game, she's stifling and smothering, and it just negates any attack from her opponent in those spots.
And that's the thing about jiu-jitsu. It's not always based around submissions and the completion of that submission. Again, I'm going to bring up Jake Shields because he's one of the all-time great grapplers who doesn't always win by submission. It'll be really dominant from Blanchfield, and that's the really good thing about her. You never look at her grappling and think, wow, she could be doing more. Maybe in terms of she could be going for more submissions, but it's normally pretty dominant when she does get on top of her opponents, and they rarely get out from under her, and that's what I do think this fight's going to be about. If JJ Aldrich can keep this on the feet, I think we talk about her boxing more than anybody on planet Earth has, and honestly, it's a good thing, because JJ Aldrich does have pretty good hands for this division, but every single fight she's ever been in basically comes down to, can she defend the takedown and keep the fight on the feet, or at least keep her opponent off of her so that she's not involved in a lot of long-term clinch work? Erin Blanchfield's kind of built for that type of style. She will move forward. She can take a hit to get into the clinch, and she does have phenomenal grappling once it does hit the ground. So I really like Erin Blanchfield in this matchup. I do honestly feel like this is almost a step back for Blanchfield, if we're being honest, but what I do like is that it's giving her more experience outside of the top 15, because at this division, everybody who gets 2 wins, it's like, oh, you should fight Valentina next. No, Valentina's so much better than everyone at 125 right now that I feel like we do need to give some of these prospects a little bit more time in the oven to kind of finish up. And for Blanchfield, if she can manage to have 5, 6, 7 fights outside the rankings to really build up on her foundation, I think she could get ready for a big title run once she does make it to the rankings.
So, Mr. Alonso saying, bruh, something telling me JJ wins a decision and she wins decisions. I mean, if we've ever seen anything, she's won 3 of them in a row, and she isn't, far removed from a lot of split decision wins as well. So if you look at a premier win for JJ Aldrich, I mean, the one over Victoria Leonardo, Vanessa Demopoulos, that was on really short notice for Demopoulos, who moved up a weight class to take the fight. And it was just JJ controlling distance, working on the outside, and working that crisp boxing. She's a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, but never kicks. And when I look at Erin Blanchfield, she walks fighters down, but she keeps her hands way out like this and doesn't have any head movement behind it. So it just stalks. You either punch the outsides of her arms or you get through to her head, and she doesn't really have the greatest striking defense, better known as a pure grappler. So if you have a look at this fight over at Fight Night Picks on Instagram in the story, the overall votes, we have 83% going with Blanchfield to 17% with JJ Aldrich. And when you look at the odds for this one too, Voodoo Wiz hanging out in the chat, Matt, Erin Blanchfield are in a minus 500 favorite.
As she should be, though, and that's the thing, like, Erin Blanchfield, it seems that after the Miranda Maverick fight, because a lot of people were high on Miranda Maverick, and I know she's had a couple stumbling blocks here and there, but still, very good fighter. Blanchfield beat the brakes off her. That fight wasn't even close when it hit the mat, and Miranda Maverick's a pretty good grappler. So I just think that if Maverick can offer pretty much nothing in terms of defensive resistance against Erin Blanchfield's grappling, I really don't think JJ Aldrich can either.
Yeah, so I mean, listen, man, we'll bring it out. Like, this is the pop and popcorn fight for me. I realize that, Blanchfield, big favorite in this one. Aldrich, the most she's been taken down in a fight was by Viviane Pereira years and years ago, coming off the Ultimate Fighter. 4 takedowns for Pereira. Anybody since, it's been but a 1. Justin Franks hitting up that super chat. It's not much, but let's show these boys some support. Let me kick it off. This research takes some serious time and effort. It does. So Justin Franks, it is certainly appreciated. For everybody tuning in, if you can't hit up the super chat, you could toss us a like. It takes 2 seconds, and there aren't many of them up there. So a couple seconds for the likes, but Matt, we'll move it forward into our next fight.
Spent a lot of time on that fight.
Andreas Michailidis is taking on Rinat Fakhretdinov, and I said it at the start of the week. I was right in the middle on this one because, listen, Rinat's striking is bad. It's really bad. It's looping overhand rights, but not really planning when he throws them. It's kicks to then set up straight punches, but leaving everything else down. It is very, very one-dimensional. But when it comes to what he can mix into his game, well, he's not really one-dimensional. He does have very good wrestling, sambo guy, pancration guy, those things in his back pocket. Andreas Michailidis, multiple-time kickboxing champ, and he is a European jiu-jitsu champion. But mixing his martial arts, well, that's also a trouble for him.
And when that's the name of the sport, you really don't want that to be a trouble for him. And I was about to completely disagree with your Rinat point about how he can be one-dimensional, but I do agree with you. He is very wild on the feet, and he's someone who, if he could refine his striking technique to add to what he already has as a grappler, then we would be talking about a guy who probably should be fighting someone on the outskirts of the top 15 in his first fight. But his wildness will get him caught at the UFC level. And yes, he has great power on the feet with his hands and with his kicks, but the problem is he leaves himself so wide open every single time he does try to engage in the pocket. It's like the complete opposite of Alex Pereira. For some reason, I went back and watched his fight with Bruno Silva this week. That fight was awesome, by the way. That fight was great. But you know what Alex Silva's really good at doing? Pereira's really good at doing? He gets his back up against the cage, lands a hook, and then gets his back off the cage and tries to circle back to the inside of the cage. Rinat does not have that in his game whatsoever, and I am worried what kind of a fighter we're going to see if he's the one on the back foot in this fight, because I don't know why I just thought of this, but it's like the show Suits. You know what they always say in that show? You know what you do if you have your back up against the wall? you break the wall down. If Rinat does have the mindset of, hey, if I get backed up by Michailidis and I'm just going to try to be aggressive, almost find like a Tyron Woodley where it's I'm going to give up space to allow my opponent to get into their range and then I explode forward, Rinat could have some success doing that. I just don't know if I like him fighting this fight on Michailidis' terms because I think he might honestly have to do that if he wants to pull out the win.
Yeah, so Kick's Good saying Andreas isn't the guy to give Rinat trouble. When you watch Andreas Michailidis strike and he's flowing, he's very, very fun to watch. A lot of big movements, and he will throw the spinning head kick, and like he throws a little bit of wild stuff. It could get him caught as well. But listen, again, when I did the tape study, I had this image of Rinat Fakhretdinov for the last year. I've been talking about him. I can't wait for him to make his UFC debut. I was so excited when he knocked out Eric Spicely. And then I did the deep dive on the tape study, and I wasn't impressed, like, whatsoever. So, over at Fight Night Picks, 74% have Rinat Fakhretdinov to get the win, and the odds on Fakhretdinov about a minus 270. You can get a minus 275. So, again, I do have Fakhretdinov in this fight, but like I said, I was right on the edge. Clay is saying I actually took a dog shot on Michailidis. He's due for a win, and this might be his worst UFC opponent. That 20-2 record for Fakhretdinov is juiced to the gills, like old Askar Majarov's was. But there's a lot of 0-2, 4-0. Like when you're 17-2 and you're beating 4-0 guys, you better beat.
Here's the thing though, just for full transparency, it does work the other way too. There are some good fighters who beat terrible fighters in the regional scene, get to the UFC, and then they do seem to make that level up. So just to be devil's advocate, it does work both ways. I do agree with you though. I have Rinat in this fight because he's fighting Michailidis as his UFC debut. But after this fight is when it really does get interesting, and I will be curious to see who do they match him up with? Like, would they give him an older Uriah Hall next just to be like, hey, let's try to build him up really quick? Or do they want to give him that slow burn? I'm very curious to see what they decide to do because he was on that contender series, the looking for a fight in the Middle East. So I'm just curious to see if they do want to give him that looking for a fight push, which isn't like an Ultimate Fighter push, but it's definitely more than what the average UFC fighter would get.
I mean, Carlston Harris is on the same episode. He got a little bit of a push.
That's
and
a good
there's
point.
a fight next weekend that I kind of look at this one and I look at that one and I go, geez, Jacob Malkoon's fighting Brendan Allen. So I think win or lose, Jacob Malkoon, put the Mamba in there with Rinat.
I think that's a great point.
There's where we go with that. But we'll move on to our next one. We have Jeff Molina taking, again, we said this before the show, Mr. Steal Your Girl. I mean, Zhalgas
save some for the
Zhumagulov,
rest of us.
the guy's been just tanning in Florida for what, like a year now? He's got a shaved head. He's wearing his hat, his traditional hat from Kazakhstan. And Matt, I look at this fight as Zhalgas Zhumagulov has to win or he's gone. Jeff Molina, win, lose, or draw, he's still going to be around. But Zhalgas is, I'm fighting for my life! To quote R. Kelly.
Zhalgas is way better than the average UFC fan thinks he is, though. And I think that's fair to say. Like, when the average fan talks about Zhalgas Zhumagulov, they think, oh, he's going to get tired, he's going to put his neck in a bad spot. Like, he will make some kind of mistake throughout his fights. But, like, the fact that you're saying that, though, like, hey, if he loses this fight, this could be it for him in the UFC is kind of wild because there's definitely less skilled fighters at the UFC level at this point. He's just fought very, very good fighters. Like, his last time out, gets knocked out very bad by Manel Kape, a pretty good fighter who I think we all have a lot of respect for.
Fighting next weekend against Ajariel Bontarin.
Exactly, and when you're fighting guys like Bontarin next, like, it tells you the level that Kape was at if you weren't familiar with him before he came over to the UFC. So, Manel Kape's a really good fighter, and if you lose by knockout to him, it's not the end of the world. This is sort of the readjustment, though. It's like, hey, you lose to the more proven guy, we'll give you Jeff Molina now. We know his highs are very high, but you do have a couple moves in your game that could give him problems. We know Jeff Molina has phenomenal boxing, really good hand speed, and great power, but when guys get on the inside, they can mix in the takedown on him, and that's something Zhalgas Zhumagulov is very good at. He's great at pressuring his opponents with his own strikes and then going in for the takedowns. The problem is, when he does strike to get on the inside, it can be a little bit wild sometimes. It will just be a lot of flurries, and against a guy like Jeff Molina, who can sit on the outside and snipe a little bit, who can get into a firefight if the fight gets ugly, I do like this fight for Jeff Molina, but that has to be said that Zhalgas Zhumagulov is far better than I think a lot of UFC fans do realize, and for Jeff Molina, like, I'm very excited by the fighter that we've seen in the UFC up until this point, but this is a big step up in competition, even though I don't think the average fan would look at it.
Yeah,
as
I
that.
mean, Fireside talking about Zhalgas, like, I look at this fight as Jeff Molina has good volume. Like, I see that comment there all the time. Kick's Good mentioning that. But his volume's one of those weird ones. It's almost like Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman starts slow and builds up.
But it's not bad. Like, if you can throw 100 punches in the third round, I refuse to admit that you don't have phenomenal cardio.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying for Jeff Molina. He's not a guy that's going out there in the first round and throwing 100 strikes. Jeff Molina's going to throw 20 to 30 significant strikes in the first round. He's not going to throw 100. But Molina he can conserve energy. He has that final push near the end of the fight. I like that out of Jeff Molina. The flip side is, if Zhumagulov can start out strong, imagine a tanned Zhalgas Zhumagulov starting a fight off strong. Like, hold on to your seatbelts.
I'm a worry a little bit what he looks like in the third round, though.
We've got GVCKD Spams L2 hitting up that super chat. Much appreciated. But, yeah, I mean, when I do look at this one, I like Molina for what he can do on the feet. His takedown defense gives me a little bit of pause. He does have a great first move back up to his feet, but if it happens in the middle of the cage, I mean, listen, just like Peter Barrett, who was short-lived in the UFC, it's Slippery's world. It's Zhalgas' world in that case.
Do you know what I would love to see? If Molina is able to get the win today, I'd love to see him versus Mateusz Nicolau next. Stylistically, those guys match up very similar. They have a very similar style. I think that'd be a phenomenal fight, and that'd be a really good step up in competition for a guy who's in the rankings and a lot more noticeable for the casual fan.
Ulanbekov, Elliott. I know they just fought, but one of those two guys. I'd like to see it.
Elliott's lost 7 fights in a row, though.
Who?
Tim Elliott.
Tagir Ulanbekov.
But for Tim Elliott, though, I wouldn't really say he's still in his prime, so I think that'd be a tough fight for him.
75% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Jeff Molina to get the win, and if we have a look at the odds in this one, Molina is favored, not the biggest of favorites, minus 183 on this card. Zhumagulov at a plus 153. So we'll move on to the next fight, Matt. Tony Gravely taking on Johnny Munoz, and we said this one at the start of the week. We're on the fence with this one because, listen, it's not a clash of styles type of matchup because both guys can grapple. It's just they do it in very different ways.
You know those egg-shaped magnets where, like, you'd throw them up in the air when you were a kid and they'd, like, hit and rattle a bunch of times? That's kind of how I see this fight, because both guys will be happy to get into...
Loud and annoying?
Loud and annoying, exactly. Because both guys do have very good grappling, like you said, but it's the ways in which they grapple that are very different. I do think scrambles are going to be the story of this fight. If Tony Gravely can avoid these scrambles and just be the heavy guy on top, then he should have a great opportunity to win this fight. But the more movement that you see on the mat once the fight does hit there, it will heavily favor Johnny Munoz Jr.
Hype 3 MMA saying, can see a flashy kick from Munoz getting caught in a standing guillotine. I've never seen Johnny Munoz throw a flashy kick in the UFC, at least. And who would get, out of these two guys, standing guillotine would be Johnny Munoz getting it on Tony Gravely. Just based on Gravely's wrestling entries. He's the type of guy that goes low and slow, double leg, single leg. And Munoz is a guy that's going to snatch your neck. And we saw Simon Oliveira try to do it again and again and again, and it didn't work for him. So, again, we've seen boxing improvements out of Gravely since he switched from ATT Atlanta to ATT down in Florida. And in Johnny Munoz Jr., we've seen little bits and pieces of advancement, from switching up gyms. I know he spent time at Entram Gym. Sequence is his home gym where his dad's a coach, and he's an uber grappling guy. And you look at Johnny Munoz Jr., he is, of course, a black belt. He's been an IBJJF champion in the past. But when you do look at Munoz, he's very much a volume strike, but he doesn't really land anything. It's more their setups to get the takedown.
And that's why I could see him walking into a big overhand right from Tony Gravely on the outside. Because for Munoz, I'm really curious to see how he gets Tony's respect on the feet. Because if he isn't much of a kicker, he is not much of a kicker, and he does try to get into boxing range, that makes it way easier for Tony to take him down because he's that much closer. And also, Gravely himself isn't much of a kicker, and if you are putting yourself in his punching range, I think Gravely's a much more heavy-handed puncher than Johnny Munoz Jr. is. Yes, Munoz Jr. might have the volume aspect on his side, but I don't know if he's going to want to have one of those fights where he just stands in the pocket with a guy like Tony Gravely, who always will have the opportunity to take him down too. But like you said, it is going to come down to, can Gravely just avoid getting caught in those like 30-second submissions where we don't know if he's going to get submitted or not?
Malone Hart hitting up the big-time super chat, sending you my spirit energy for the Fight Night Spirit Ball from Savannah, Georgia.
Isn't that where the Bananas play?
The Savannah Banana. And they have 2 teams. I found that out. I thought they had one.
I love everything about that team.
There's 2 teams. Could you imagine doing the splits and trying to hit a baseball at the same time?
It's just, I love how they were like, let's PT Barnum the F out of baseball and make it fun. It's a good time.
It's wild stuff. But I look at this fight, Matt. Malone Hart, MVP of the show. 54% of the fans on Gravely. 46% with Munoz, and if you have a look at the odds, Matt, it is Tony Gravely, slight favorite, open -150, -126 right now. Munoz open +130, +104. Tony Gravely, as the comment team has mentioned. Gravely mixing in the takedowns, but you listen and hitting them on the way back up like Fedor. That'd be kind of neat to see. Fedor just walking guys down, punching, looking long and strong and kind of a little round in the middle.
He was so fast in his prime. That was wild.
Speedy heavyweight, but yeah, I do like this fight, Matt. I've got Gravely, you've got Gravely.
I do, but this is a very difficult fight for him. Like, this will not be an easy fight for either guy. And honestly, we could have put this on, like, the fight of the night screen. That's how good of a fight this should be, because both guys are, I would say, competent enough on the feet to where they could strike for 15 minutes, but you know Gravely's going to be looking for that takedown at some point, and Munoz is going to be more than happy to grapple at some point throughout this fight, so I think it's going to be a great one.
You're here slightly after noon, Atlantic time, where we're at. You're probably a little bit earlier, depending on where you're at, especially Savannah, Georgia. You're an hour behind us, but I look at the prelims coming up on this card, and especially if you've already joined the show with us, you're going to be checking out the prelims. They're a little bit better than the prelims of the UFC pay-per-view card next weekend. They are not the best prelims coming up next weekend, but Matt, one that I can look forward to coming up today, Benoit Saint-Denis take on Niklas Stolze. And Matt, for Niklas, I said he was probably going to have to cut off an appendage. It looks like they're all there, but he does look a lot thinner, and the last time that he fought at lightweight, he lost to an 11-12-1 fighter at Bama 30, did Niklas Stolze. He is a long-time welterweight. He is a giant guy, and for Benoit Saint-Denis, his calling card since he's joined MMA is the fact that he's a super lightweight. He fights at 165. Not that 170 is a bridge too far, where he made his debut on somewhat a short notice against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, but lightweight's really the ticket, and physically, both these guys didn't look too bad on the scales yesterday.
They didn't, and that's a very good point to bring up, because I know we were both worried about how Dustin Stolze was going to look at the weigh-ins, but he did look pretty good. He was noticeably the bigger guy, and I am curious as to how much weight he did cut for this fight, because he could fade as a result of the weight cut, because again, he did look
He looked sunken in.
We've definitely seen worse, though.
Like, yeah.
Max Holloway's always my go-to for why you can't believe the scales for anything. Because at 145, he doesn't even look like a human when he weighs in. And then the next day, he basically runs 2 marathons and throws 500 punches while he does it. So I never know how much you can take from it. But in this matchup, for me, this fight just comes down to how good will Benoit Saint-Denis look at 155? Because let's say he does look like a supercharged version of the guy who fought Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, then he should be able to win this fight. I am just curious, how physically is he going to look after he did take all that damage? But again, he is at his natural weight class, so I do expect the best version possible from him. But like we said earlier on in the week in the prediction videos, both these guys desperately need a win. Now for Saint-Denis, they might keep him around for one more if he does lose this, because again, he made a very good account of himself, even though he did take an ungodly amount of damage his last time out. But it's one of those like, hey, you did us a favor, we'll kind of look after you too. But if you lose to Dustin Stolze in your own weight class, that's a tough look for anybody. So I do still have Saint-Denis. I like his grappling. I like his speed on his entries too. He's someone who is very quick at getting to the point, and that's what I really like. He knows what he's good at, and he knows what he's not good at, and I do think that's going to really pay off in this matchup.
So I see it over there. Kick's good saying this likely Stolze's last UFC fight, especially if he loses. To your point, Pat Lee, appreciate the super chat. Have a drink of Picaroons on me. Thanks for the videos, guy. Pat. From Freddie, the
Picaroons hat on right now.
Hat. We got K33K saying, you lads have been my new favorite rundowns for the upcoming cards, and I never miss a show. I very rarely donate to channels, but y'all deserve it. Let's get into it. That's certainly appreciated from the New Zealander, Pat the Canadian.
Thank you, guys.
Malone Hart. It is a big time episode. So, Matt, we've got the the Pure North energy drinks. I've got the birch beer. Somebody was asking what I was drinking. It's birch beer. It's not real beer. It's like root beer and cream soda if you mix it together, but it comes from birch sap. Isn't that fun?
Not a single person's asked, but you've given us so much information on birch beer today.
Somebody wants one more. It takes about 40 times the amount of sap to get out of a birch tree to then boil it down to turn it into birch sap than it does from maple.
If I could care any less.
Birch syrup. So that is fun. But listen, we're more than MMA, Matt. But let's have a look at Fight Night Picks on Instagram, see what the fans thought of this one. 75% have Benoit Saint-Denis. So I saw it up there earlier. Clay, big time friend of the show over there in the chat, saying that you're going with Niklas Stolze. And if I have a look at it, Matt, I have Benoit Saint-Denis at a -160. In the return, the question mark kicks parlay. It's the first leg. I like Benoit Saint-Denis, Matt. I'll tell you why. Niklas Stutz is a very, very good kickboxer. It is the meat and potatoes.
Very, very is a step. I'll agree with very good, but very, very is a step I will not take
It is
with
the
you.
main part of his game. Benoit Saint-Denis can strike, but it is definitely not the best part of his game. We've seen Stutz taken down and struggle with the ground game. And that's where Benoit Saint-Denis takes over. And again, with a longer guy, is he going to be able to get back up? Especially taller guy? Well, that remains to be seen. But I like Saint-Denis on the entries. I like him with the strength. And if it makes it to a third round, Stutz can give a good account of himself. Maybe he can get the win in the third round. But I think Saint-Denis wins the first, the second, and if he doesn't get a finish.
This one I have to bring up, though. I got to bring up the Victor Ortiz X Factor. I'm very worried about the amount of damage Benoit Saint-Denis took in his last fight. It's not a TKO loss, but he straight up got TKO'd on his feet several times in that matchup, and he took a lifetime's worth of damage. So I am curious, will he be less comfortable on his feet in this matchup? Now, that could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. Let's say he does try to go to his bread and butter a little bit earlier. Shoots for the takedown earlier. That could be good, but also, if he does completely remove the striking aspect from his fighting, and I don't mean completely remove it, you just get the idea. If he is a little bit more hesitant on the feet, maybe we do see him rush into some positions that we normally would see him be a little bit more hesitant with, and he could get caught if that is the case, but I agree with you. I do like Saint-Denis in this matchup.
Old Benoit Saint-Denis, if he loses this one, you're talking about him getting cut. Chris Moutinho got cut off of 2 losses.
He did.
We'll see what happens, Matt. We have Damon Jackson and Dan Argueta. Listen, I'm not a big David Guetta guy in terms of the thumping.
Hey.
That's a good song,
Okay.
but that's because of Kid Cudi. But when
What-
I do...
The Rihanna one's pretty good. Who's that chick?
No. But when I look at this one, Damon Jackson, Argueta, Jackson, grappler, featherweight. Dan Argueta, made featherweight, wrestler, not striker. So, Matt, when it does come down to this fight, I'm going to mention the odds in this one because I forgot what they were until I looked at them today, just before the show. And Damon Jackson, open to minus 200. He's a minus 687. Dan Argueta took this fight on a week's notice. He opened plus 170. He's plus 480. I have Damon Jackson.
David Jackson's better than you probably think he is. He comes from the same, Julian Erosa line. There's other fighters who fight in this manner, where I'm a very pressure-heavy volume striker. I'm willing to get hit sometimes, but if you get tired, I can submit you. There are other fighters like this. Gerald Meerschaert from middleweight comes to mind. There seems to be, 2 or 3 fighters like this in every single weight class, but Damon Jackson's sort of at the upper echelon of what this type of fighter can bring, and it is wild how Julian Erosa, multiple stints in the UFC, Damon Jackson now on his second stint in the UFC. I just feel like a lot of people remember Damon Jackson for being the guy who got knocked out by Ilia Topuria, and they just sort of forget about a lot of the positives that come with his game too, but he is a very good striker when he's moving forward. He has good boxing, and the thing I like about Damon Jackson, he seems to be more heavy-handed than he is. It's almost like Tony Ferguson. He won't land punches that really rock his opponent, but it just seems to be an accumulation of damage as the fight goes on. Guys' faces when they fight Damon Jackson, they do tend to bust up as the fight goes on, so I just think this is a very, very tough fight for Argueta in his UFC debut to be taking on Damon Jackson, a cardio king, on only a week's notice.
So Clay and Steelhead saying that Juan Archuleta, the former bantamweight champ over with the Bellators, he's got you on Dan Argueta. And going back and watching the tape, I love the wrestling out of Argueta. He trains with Cub Swanson. He trains with those guys out of SoCal like Juan Archuleta, but he's also Jackson Wink guy as well. But wrestling is the diet out of his game. And he might be unsubbable because he's kind of smaller and his neck's compact. And I think that's a polite way to say it. And Damon Jackson might not be able to get his neck, but he has arms and he has legs. And
So wait, neck like Butterbean is a positive?
Butterbean glove right behind you. He's really hittable, though. That's the trouble for me. So Damon Jackson, 76% of the fans going with him. 24% with Dan Argueta. But, I look at the odds, and they're juiced. So, Matt, I'm going to eat my popcorn, the prop, but I'm only going to have one. Your pick here is still Damon Jackson?
Yeah, I like David Jackson a lot in this fight.
All right, Matt going with Jackson. Joe Selecki's taking on Alex De Silva. And listen, you look at the stats on a page, and I want to make sure I get this right. So the UFC had Alex De Silva as 5'8". They had Joe Selecki as 5'9". But when they faced off, Alex De Silva was like a head taller.
Might
have been wearing shoes.
UFC stats are wrong all the time, so don't take their website as gospel. And Tapology has heights wrong all the time. I don't know who uses the measuring tape for the UFC, but they don't know how to use it.
Inside baseball. So when I do the heights, Matt, I go ESPN and UFC are always the same. So they're kind of the pinnacle premier. Tapology doesn't update heights and reaches ever. Don't look at Tapology.
This is my whole point. Like, you get mad at me sometimes because I bring this up a lot. If you look at the UFC Stats website, they don't credit Darren Till with dropping Robert Whittaker. I've watched that fight. Darren Till drops Robert Whittaker, so I know I'm right and the website's wrong.
My point is, Alex De Silva, he's taller.
He is.
Looking big at 155.
Looked bigger than Joe Solecki by not a meaningful amount, but he did look much bigger than I thought he would.
And we know Selecki's one of those kind of, fight night. He ends up as a bigger guy at 155 in his own right. So I'm going to look at the votes for this at Fight Night Picks. 59% going Selecki, 41% Alex De Silva. And when you do look at De Silva, Matt, this guy coming into the UFC was billed as a first-round finisher. We know this. He's this great striker. And in his 3 UFC fights, it's been Alex De Silva, wrestler, grappler, and we haven't seen any striking at all. His teammate coming up next weekend in the co-main event, fighting for the belt. That's Tyler Santos out of Astra Fight Team. But Matt, Alex De Silva has a good opportunity to kind of round it out, 2-2, I guess, against the really tough grappler in Joe Solecki.
If Alex De Silva fights like he used to, he should have a great chance to win this fight. But like you said, if he comes in here shooting double legs against Joe Solecki, he's probably getting guillotined 30 seconds into this fight. The weird thing about Joe Solecki is that, again, when I talk about Damon Jackson, you talk about other fighters in different divisions who fight in a similar manner. Joe Solecki's cut from I'm kind of a basic boxer on the feet. I don't have a lot to give in my striking, but the second the fight hits the mat, I'm very heavy on top, and I can really just... It's almost like he weighs more than he does when he does get his opponents to the mat. He just does not lose that top position very often once he is able to gain it. And if De Silva comes into this fight thinking, hey, I'm a pretty good grappler myself, a la Jamal Hill when he fought Paul Craig, he's probably going to end up getting submitted by Joe Solecki. The thing about Solecki is, I'm worried about him in some set positions on the ground. If he gets held down himself, sometimes I do worry, is he going to be like a Luis Smolka? Will he give away rounds off his back? Because, hey, at least I'm grappling in the mind of Joe Solecki and I'm not on the feet, so this gives me a better chance to win. That's an area of this fight that I'm very curious to see. If De Silva does go for a lot of takedowns, how does Solecki look off his back? Because I don't really think he's going to be throwing up a lot of submissions. I think he will be looking more to sweep or to get back up to his feet. But I think that's going to be an interesting position that we could find Joe Solecki in. I still like his grappling overall, but the Jared Gordon fight does put a little bit of doubt in my mind.
Jared Gordon's a tricky guy that can go a hard 3 rounds. Alex De Silva, early guy, and then once he gets into the second round, it gets a little fast and loose, and you worry a little bit about it. Now, he's been away for a long time. I expect that we do get a better opportunity for him, but Matt, when I look at this one, Selecki minus 175, and I had earlier on Benoit Saint-Denis at a plus 160. It's QMK parlay, so I get those two at a plus 155 together. I have Selecki in this matchup, and again, I look at this as if Alex De Silva goes out there and strikes, he makes it competitive. Joe Solecki's not the very best of strikers, so if it's a good game plan, I'm eager to see that one. Alex De Silva, though, if he goes in there and tries to take him down, it's like Bartosz Fabinski against Gerald Meerschaert. He's just going to walk right into the submission. Hey, you want to come in here? Door's open. Let's go. Let's make it happen. So I do have Joe Solecki in this one, Matt, but we'll move on to our next fight.
Just last thing on Joe Solecki, he needs to add some kind of a striking component to his game, though, for his opponents to really respect him on the feet. Because right now, if you're fighting Joe Solecki, your corner's telling you, hey, don't get taken down, we're going to win this fight, if you do have a base in striking. So Solecki needs, and I know this is my new poster boy for guys who have added striking to their game, he's going to get on whatever Pat Sabatini's on right now. If you can just sit down on your punches a little bit more, we don't need flashy kicks, I just need effective kicks. I really do think Joe Solecki could then take his game to the next level.
Steelhead, I'm a friend of Art Vandelay, and if we have a look at this, Matt, 430 tuning in right now, there's only 100 likes. That's a quarter of you. It takes 2 seconds. It would mean a lot to the show. And look, another one popped in.
Can we get a Kambosos Haney prediction? Here's the thing. Haney's a lot faster, but he doesn't have a great shin. Linares hurt him right at the end of one of their rounds. I still think he's going to win, though. He's a lot faster than Kambosos. And that was weird with Kambosos missing weight and then not missing weight and being like the art of war. It's not really deception if you tell everybody it's deception. So that was weird. I liked Evan Haney.
All right, Matt. So we move into our next fight. Felice Herrig's taking on Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And if anybody sells you anything on this fight, they're selling you snake oil and they're a liar. I mean, I don't know who's going to win this fight. Like, the worst thing that happens, Matt, out of, like, us doing Fight Night picks, like, how did you guys not know this? How did you not know?
Well,
because, and I'm not going to curse, but I'd like to say the F word with a kin at the end, because Karolina Kowalkiewicz has lost 5 fights in a row. Yeah. Felice Herrig's 5-on-in spans 5 years with multiple layoffs due to major injuries, and they're both in their late 30s. Facing off against each other once more. Like, the winner of this fights Jessica Penne, again, for Kowalkiewicz, and the loser just goes home.
Remember, okay, this isn't a weird fever dream I had, and this is true, right? Vitor Belfort fought Evander Holyfield not that long ago, right?
No, they were going to do it.
No, he knocked him out, I'm sure. Right. This is weird. I didn't even remember if it was true or not, but yeah, he knocked out Evander Holyfield, and it was weird, and it was really sad. This is like that fight, but not on Triller. The UFC was like, sure, just bring it on back. Because you're right, Karolina Kowalkiewicz is not at all the championship caliber fighter that she once was. And I say championship caliber because, again, she beat Rose Namajunas, and it was a really good fight all the way back at UFC 201. She had a great fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Yes, it was one-sided, but still, she did have some moments throughout that fight. She's just not that same fighter whatsoever anymore.
When these two fought, they were both top 10 ranked strawweights. They're not ranked anymore.
And that's the thing, isn't it what? Like, Karolina Kowalkiewicz has not won a fight since she fought Felice Herrig years ago.
And Felice Herrig has not won a fight
since that fight.
Since before that.
Yeah, we're not really talking about two of the best athletes in the world competing in a mixed martial arts fight to figure out who's going to go down as one of the all-time greats. This is just a fight. And in just this fight, I'm going to side with Karolina Kowalkiewicz because she won their first one. But I have
Felice Herrig at the start of the week.
I know I did, but this is the only fight on the whole card I'm switching. Because again, Karolina Kowalkiewicz won their original matchup, and this is the only position in their first fight that had any difference whatsoever. In the middle, they were doing a lot of pitter-patter striking, a lot of both people landing at the same time. Karolina did have those clinch elbows, though, on the inside, and that was the only position in their fight that would allow one fighter to pull apart from the other. And I think Karolina's the shell of her former self, but the truth has to be said, so is Felice Herrig. So I'm going to switch my pick on this to go with who won the original matchup. I know it was a split decision, but I think you said this in the original video, too. That was no split decision whatsoever. That was a 2-1 for Karolina Kowalkiewicz. It was a good fight. It wasn't terrible, but I do like the clinch from Karolina. At least that's the one position in this matchup where I do think she can win, whereas I think it's just a lot of other 50-50 situations in this fight.
So, Paul Pierce, you bring up a great point. I mean, just buy some popcorn. Just go to the store, buy some popcorn, then get into the next fight. I still have Felice Herrig in this one, but it's anybody's guess.
It is.
And at the end of the year, it ends up switching our picks by a count of 1, and we're only off by 1, Matt, so far. So our next fight, Alonzo Menifield's taking on the record of Askar Mazarov. And Matt, I have a lot of records in this office. What do I have? I got Ghost. But listen, Askar Mazarov's record this week took a hit like April wine because it went harder and faster. And holy smokes, the people are not on him. So I mentioned this when we started the show, when we were talking about our fight tonight, that the odds have shifted tremendously for this one. Alonzo Menifield opened to minus 130. All through last week, minus 160, minus 165. And then Thursday night, he went from minus 171 all the way down to a minus 255. Alonzo Menifield right now is a big favorite. And Askar Mazarov now sits at a plus 205. Did Askar Mazarov's fighting style change? You imagine if it did, like a couple days before, he's like, screw it, I'm not a striker anymore, I'm a grappler. Well, yeah, then I would expect it to happen. But he went from 25-7 on certain sites, or 21-8 in others, to now 19-12. Again, I watched him fight 15-10 Christian Torres just a couple of years ago, and he got taken down and ate one elbow to the forehead and put his hand up to the referee and said, I'm done. And the ref said, what? And then he took a couple more elbows, and then he tapped due to strikes.
So did Charles Oliveira, and now he's one of the all-time greats.
Again, Matt, he's beaten poor competition. Competition that people don't even know now, and they've added losses to his record. If he wins, though, I think he's going to win in the first round by something insane, and then he is going to be a fan favorite, but I have Alonzo Menifield here.
Yeah, I also have Alonzo Menifield. When was the last time we sat here and said, hey, a guy's record has changed by 10 fights in the span of 1 week? You'd probably think he's been fighting twice a day for the whole entire week, but no. People have just like Sherlock Holmes the shit out of his resume, and they figured out, Askar, you are not the person we thought you were. It just is weird. Like, this is a very uncommon situation to have at the UFC level. You would hear about stuff like this on, like, regional scenes where you don't really know about fighters and exactly what their records are. But at the UFC level, you would really assume that the matchmakers and whoever overlooks just the roster for the UFC would be able to say, like, hey, this guy who we're going to give money to, we should probably know what his backstory is. Just been a weird fight week. It really has been. But I do agree with what you said. If Askar wins, it's going to be by something wild in the first round. Again, don't let his newly found record deceive you. His style is still the same. He is a kill or be killed type of striker who has porous takedown defense, but he is a very high level athlete, and that is what I want to say. Like, he has absurd fast twitch muscles. His fast hands are extremely fast, and I do think he will have the opportunity to maybe get a flash knockout early. But the holes in his game are quite apparent, and against a guy like Alonzo Menafield, who again won't wow you with his talent here or there, but he is steady, it's a really tough fight to have in your UFC debut.
So two things to say, Matt. So Giancarlo Schmidt, you gotta stop asking the same question. Biggest favorite that scares you? I don't know, Alonzo Menafield taking on Askar Mazarov. Like, Alonzo Menafield's lost to some poor competition. I mean, it's not like Devin Clark's a world beater. He's steady, and it was a close fight, but again, and you can make an argument, he also has a loss to William Knight. And it was close, and I thought Alonzo won, but still, William Knight. So, realistically, Matt, I do look at this fight as Askar Mazarov better, especially with his footwork. This guy has very, like, he's on the balls of his feet, and it's a fundamentals thing that you're taught when you're coming up through, and he still does it to this day. Doesn't really take any time off, never getting caught flat-footed. Steelhead that dude is Conor McGregor. Well, just like Conor McGregor, Askar Mazarov hasn't fought in a lengthy amount of time. He hasn't fought in a couple years. So, Matt, if we have a look at Fight Night picks, total votes 79% with Alonzo Menafield. We'll move on, Matt, to our next one, where we split on the pick, and this is a main card fight with a 4-3 fighter taking on a guy that's 10-4 with a no contest, Ode Osbourne. I saw Alex Bakunin asked him what his favorite Bob Marley song was. Don't worry about a thing. And then he sang it, so it was pretty cool. But for Ode Osbourne, he was a Pura Vida BJJ guy. Saw somebody out there in the chat, and for some reason it slipped my mind. I made the mistake based off of, I don't know, using my brain. I put Pura Vida BJJ as his gym for the week, but he has since switched things up, and he's been training for some time at Syndicate MMA, so good on Ode Osbourne. Better level of training partner. Not to say that Pura Vida is a bad gym at all, but a good opportunity for him there in Vegas for Zarrukh Adashev, a longtime guy out of the New Jersey, New York area. But when you look at Adashev, Matt, he's had a wild kickboxing career that we don't really talk about because he's 4-3 in MMA.
Exactly. You just look at his MMA record and you're like, wait, why the heck is he here right now? But that's the thing about this fight. If you just look at their MMA resumes and if you don't do the deep dive on how these guys fight, Ode Osbourne wins this fight 10 times out of 10. And honestly, even at the UFC level, Ode Osbourne's probably looked a little bit better with his level of competition. I just think stylistically, Zarrukh Adashev is going to pose some interesting questions for Ode Osbourne to figure out, because Osbourne is a great example of a guy who reach is just a stat. It's not a positive, it's not a negative, it's just a stat. People like to look at reaches and automatically think, oh, the person with a longer reach has some sort of inherent advantage. It's not true at all. It's just a number. There's positives and there's negatives.
Look at Stefan Struve.
Exactly. That's a very good example. Neil Magny, early on in his career, a guy who could use the jab. Now you see guys get on the inside of Neil Magny. He is not as good as a result. But that's the thing about Ode Osbourne. He does have pretty good power when he sits down on his shots at the long distance with his striking range. I still think Zarrukh Adashev is going to give him that opportunity. And I point to Zarrukh's footwork because he's not somebody who sits down on his own shots, and normally that's a negative because you don't have much power on it. But if you go back and watch that Zhumagulov fight, he loses that fight because he gets outstruck with the volume. But the one good thing I liked about him was that he moved his feet a lot in that matchup, and I think if he fights this fight in a similar style to the Zhumagulov fight, he can have a lot of success because Ode does like to plant and then throw. And if you're planting and throwing, you are giving your opponent, who is a very high-level pure striker, just more of a read on you. And every time you give him more information, he's going to be able to get closer, land a little bit closer with his power shots, or just be able to figure out your own riddle with your defense a little bit faster. And I do think Zarrukh Adashev, just stylistically, is a tough matchup for Ode Osbourne. Again, I think Ode might even have the higher ceiling at the UFC level, but I do like Adashev in this matchup.
To me, I like Ode Osbourne with the well-roundedness. Now, our takedowns, his expertise, is he a wrestler by trade? Not necessarily, but he does have the submission ability once it does get to the mat. And for Zarrukh Adashev, that loss to Tyson Nam, you can kind of throw that out the window. That was on about a week's notice against a
A good fighter.
A good fighter, and then you look at his next fight against Zhumagulov. There were some things that you could point out as positives. Then he took on the ghost of Ryan Benoit.
Zhumagulov pretty good, though, too, and that has to be said.
And Ryan Benoit hasn't been good in a meaningful period of time. So if we do have a look at the odds in this fight, Matt, Ode Osbourne is the favorite. He opened as a minus 280. You could have got him at a minus 150, and now he's at a minus 200. And for 4 and 3, Zarrukh Adashev at a plus 167. I've seen some arguments over there in the comments section, Matt. But yeah, for me, I do have Ode Osbourne. But again, just my 2 cents. Adashev will have to crash forward, cover the reach disparity. When he does, he's going to get slumped. But I've seen Zarrukh Adashev crash distance. I've also seen him fight up, like 20 kgs more than his actual weight in kickboxing.
Yeah.
He's like 40 pounds.
It's wild.
And beat guys. So Zarrukh Adashev, when it comes to striking, is very, very, very good. That's the angle I took this week.
Filthy spinning back kick.
It was a fun deep dive, I will say that. So Matt, we'll move on to our next one. Poliana Botelho is taking on Erin Silva. And listen, I listened to her say her name on the Contender Series intro, and she said Erin. But they're going with Erin, so call her Erin, call her Erin. I'm going to stick with Erin. But for Killer Silva, she is exactly that. And she is a first-round finisher to the nth degree with her hands, with her jiu-jitsu. The one thing I didn't love in her last fight in the first round where she gets taken down and then she just holds guard and just locks those ankles up and holds down on her opponent. And listen, once it got into the second round, she's able to get the submission win. But she is such an interesting fighter when it comes to her striking style. For Poliana Botelho, a stand-up fighter, mainly what she's known for. She worked it to great effect in the first round of her last fight. A lot of takedown attempts as well. But for Botelho, she's one of those fighters that, in my mind, I think, okay, Poliana Botelho has a style to go out there and fight 3 rounds. Like, she's not a big-time finisher. Erin Silva is one of those ones that, listen, we're going to empty that gas tank quick. But she wins fights that way.
And that's the thing, we don't often talk about women's MMA fighters who have a very high potential for finishing. There's people like Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm for a little while had some head kicks, but for the most part, these are a lot of decision fights. But Erin Silva does bring that sort of extra flavor to the pot because she can go out there and get finishes, like you said, with her hands and with her jiu-jitsu. And I think that's going to be really important in this matchup because if it does end inside the distance, Erin Silva is going to be the winner, almost without a doubt. Unless her cardio falls off a cliff in the third round, and Botelho is able to implement some kind of grappling, get on top, maybe get a submission. But I like Erin Silva's physicality in this matchup quite a bit. I look to the fact that Macy Barber almost fought Valentina Shevchenko because she was aggressive, strong, and threw a lot of power punches on the feet. And that was pretty much her whole entire game. Yes, she could wrestle a little bit, but you don't look at Macy Barber and think, wow, this is some technical standout. But those 3 attributes almost got her to a title shot before she tore her ACL against Roxanne Modafferi. I just think Erin Silva is built from the archetype of a fighter that has had success in this division before. So I do like Erin Silva in this matchup, but this is an interesting fight to give her out the gate because I think it's one of those peaks and valleys. She has a lot of strengths that should be very apparent in this matchup, but as the fight goes on, they will get chipped away at.
So you look at Erin Silva, built different.
Different.
We could really put a good sales pitch around her. The one thing I want to talk about, you look at Silva, all 14 of her wins are by finish, and 3 of her 4 losses are also by finish. So I see a lot of people saying take, fight not to go the distance and plus odds. Maybe you want to go that way. Kicks Good saying Silva by KO possibility. Poliana Botelho is, and I want to make sure that you don't get it twisted, she's 3 and 3 in the UFC. And we talk about some of those wins. They're not over the greatest level competition, but I just want to have a look at the losses. Split decision loss to Luana Carolina, a decision loss to Jillian Robertson, and a rear naked choke loss to Cynthia Calvillo. That girl is nasty.
The problem, though, is her last win was over Lauren Mueller, who, if you remember her career whatsoever, is one of the worst fighters to ever have multiple fights in the UFC.
She was undefeated coming into the UFC. How wild is that? So we're split on the pick, Matt. Botelho and Silva. We'll have a look at Fight Night picks to give those folks some shine. Over on the Instagrams, 54% going with Silva, 46% with Poliana Botelho. So Matt, we'll switch it up and we'll go into our next fight. Lucas Almeida made weight. This guy is a lightweight. He's a Jungle Fights lightweight champ. He's not really accustomed to featherweight at all. And he's taking on Mike Trizano, former Ultimate Fighter winner at 145. And I looked at these two guys, and Mike Trizano looked a little drawn out. I'll be honest. I hate that cowboy hat. I hate it. I think it looks so stupid. American flag cowboy hat. And it's like all curled in. I think it looks goofy.
If Mike Trizano watched our videos, he'd probably chirp the F out of both of us, so who cares?
Go for it, Mike. But I look at this as Lucas Almeida did have the height advantage out of these two guys, but my God, he does not look like the guy in that picture. Like, he was slimmed down a lot. So Lucas Almeida taking on Trizano, and for Almeida, all 13 of his wins are by finish. And if you look at Mike Trizano, a boxing specialist, he can mix in some of those low kicks to really good effect, and he can push a great pace on his opponent. So I like these two guys. Almeida is the wilder striker, and he's going to throw more power shots than Trizano. Trizano likes to set his things up. So a good opportunity for both guys, Matt, but I said this at the start of the week, and I still have it now. I think Mike Trizano wins this fight 9 times out of 10.
I also really like Mike Trizano in this fight, but it does feel like there's a couple trap doors in this matchup that he could easily fall into, because for Trizano, he almost strikes like he's Uriah Hall, where he's like waiting for the perfect shot sometimes, but the difference is Uriah Hall can set you up with crazy feints, he can shift his hips to make you think he's going to throw a wheel kick, and then end with an overhead. Trizano doesn't necessarily have that type of striking, but he will try to set things up. The only issue is sometimes he does take a little bit too long, and sometimes he won't do the in-betweens for his power shots, but I do still like the well-rounded game out of Mike Trizano, and he was never necessarily the fighter I thought he'd become coming off the Ultimate Fighter. I had some fairly high hopes for him, for being honest, but he is still extremely well-rounded, like you said, and that does take you very far at the UFC level. I like his steady output throughout 3 rounds. He's not somebody who will have a very big difference in his fighting style from round 1 to round 2 to round 3. He will basically stay on the same level, and I do think that's going to be very important, because in the early goings of this fight, with Almeida's explosiveness and, like you said, his wild striking, Trizano could get himself caught, but I do think that as this fight goes on, minute after minute, it's going to make it easier for Trizano to not only get the takedown, but hold Almeida down too, and I think that's going to be a really important part of this fight, because, and I hate saying this, but for Trizano to have a lot of success, I do think you will almost have to make this a little bit boring. Go for the takedown. Don't even try to necessarily advance past guard, half guard, take big risks so that your opponent can get up. Just get on top and try to get that top control, and I think Trizano can have a pretty good win.
Clay's in the same market as us on this one. I mean, listen, I like Lucas Almeida. In his last fight on Contender Series, he lost to a 22-year-old prospect who's good. Zellhuber's good. But, like, in that one, it was like, well, this guy had a fun fight, and I know we already signed Carlos Candelario off a loss, but this guy's got to go out there, win another fight, and we're going to bring him right back. And he did that against a lesser fighter who was moving up a weight class to take the fight. It's really weird to me. So if Almeida wins this fight, I will be shocked and surprised, and I'll come out, and I'll give him his flowers, and I'll sing his praises. And if Mike Trizano wins, well, I'm still not going to like that cowboy hat. I think it looks a little dinky, I guess. So
who cares what anybody looks like?
The comments section's still talking about it. But if we have a look, Matt, 63% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Trizano. And we'll move into our co-main event of the evening. We have Dan Ige. 50K! Ige taking on Movsar, no nickname, Evloev. And if you look at Movsar Evloev, undefeated. I'd say the fight in the UFC where he had to withstand the most adversity was when he took on Nick Lentz, because he actually got hit a couple of times, and he was able to hit Nick Lentz and retire him. But if you do look at it for Evloev, he kind of got the kitchen sink of a Nick Lentz. Like, again, the striking, the guillotines. You know exactly what you're going to get. It's like fighting Georgi Karhanyan. I always put those two guys in the same camp. They fight the exact same
Nick
way.
Lentz is way better.
Georgie's getting taken out. He's pulling guillotine. But listen, Kyle O.M. hitting up the super chat. That is appreciated. Very much so. But Matt, when we look at this fight, Dan Ige fought that level of competition in the UFC, has a win on his record against Edson Barboza, has that crazy finish over Gavin Tucker where he was able to get him out of there early and made him look completely levels, heads and shoulders, not head and shoulders, heads and shoulders above. But for Ige, you look at it too, and he's lost to some of those better guys. So a good measuring stick. And if Ige is able to get a win here, well, he is who we thought he was.
This is almost the perfect matchmaking for this division, because I was thinking last night, who are some of the kind of more famous gatekeepers in the UFC? You've got Derek Brunson always comes to mind in the middleweight division. If you beat Derek Brunson, you're probably fighting for a title one day.
Alexander Volkov.
That was the next guy I was about to bring up. Alexander Volkov in today's main event. If you beat him, you're probably destined for great things. If you lose to him, not back to the prelims for you, but you're probably not going to be main eventing anytime soon. Dan Ige has become that guy for the featherweight division, to where if you beat Dan Ige, the Korean Zombie get a title shot off it, Calvin Kattar got the Max Holloway fight off it. Like, good things are going to happen to you if you are able to beat Dan Ige. But this is the thing. It's really, really hard to do. And even if you do beat him, you are going to take a lot of damage in the fight leading up to the win. And I think that's sort of the one area of Movsar's game that we haven't seen yet. What happens to Movsar if he gets hurt early and not finished, but gets hurt early and now he's forced to be on the feet a little bit? Maybe Dan Ige's defending takedowns a little bit better than we realized. Maybe he's a little bit more competitive in some of these scrambles than people realized. This is a really difficult fight for Movsar Evloev, but that's great. And, like, that is kind of the part of his career that he should be at right now. He is 15-0 and has looked not unbeatable, but has looked very, very dominant in every single aspect of MMA, and that's what I like about Movsar Evloev. Could he win a fight striking for 15 minutes? I think he could. Against guys in the top 15 in the featherweight division, there's some very good strikers there, so maybe he couldn't beat Josh Emmett in a striking battle, but you get the idea. He can go out there and win fights just with his striking and win them by decision based off that. Can he win a decision based off his grappling? You're darn right he could. And guess what? If he does grapple for 15 minutes, there's a great chance he gets a stoppage on the way there. It's just, this fight has so many different things that we could talk about. That's how you know it's a great co-main event.
You get a win over Dan Ige in the UFC, you're off to the races, or you're Julio Arce and you're fighting on the prelims and
Gavin
fights.
Tucker.
But listen, I do look at this one, and if you consider it for Movsar Evloev, big time opportunity. I mean, maybe a fight against, like you mentioned. I mean, well, there's only so many names up there, but Calvin Kattar, Korean Zombie, if he's still fighting, he hasn't retired. Yair Rodriguez. But again, that's the other thing. I'm glad it's Dan Ige today and not Yair Rodriguez or somebody else, because then you get the Frankie Edgar type of fight, or Yair BJ Penzum and just completely erases all the hype.
Like, low-key almost outboxed Max Holloway his last time out, so I would never want to fight that man.
It's kind of crazy. So, listen, I do really like this fight. I think Dan Ige's got a great opportunity because, again, it really fits into the pocket for both of these guys. You have a look at the odds in this fight, Matt, just to bring them up really quickly. And if you consider Dan Ige, he is a decent underdog. Open to plus 170, plus 313. And for Movsar Evloev, open to minus 200, minus 408. So if you like Dan Ige a week or two ago, and you still like him now, you get to double it. But the fans at Fight Night Picks, Matt, I've heard a lot of chatter about both these guys all week. 75% going Evloev here.
This is what I really like about Dan Ige. And I haven't made a basketball reference yet, so this is the time.
I'm already hitting up that super chat.
Thank you, Marty.
Appreciate you too as well, basketball reference.
So this thing about Dan Ige, like, James Harden and Giannis have this weird rivalry, right? James Harden was like, oh, I wish I could just dribble and dunk like him. And it's almost like saying he's not skilled. This is the difference. Dan Ige, I liken a little bit to Giannis, because you know what? He's not going to beat himself. I'm not worried about Dan Ige showing up just for a paycheck. Like, every version of Dan Ige, win, lose, or draw, is the exact same fighter. He's going to throw power shots, he's going to defend takedowns, he's going to go for his own takedowns. Just, I don't look at Dan Ige as a fighter who's going to beat himself. You really have to go out there and take it from him. And that's why I do think this is the perfect matchup, because there's some fighters out there who, when the going gets tough, they do look for a way out, and the fight gets much easier. And against a guy like Movsar Evloev, who is so well-rounded, if you start looking for a way out, he's immediately going to take you down, take your back, and choke you out, and the fight will not be competitive. But since Dan Ige, if he, whether he gets dropped, whether he gets taken down, he is still going to keep on fighting, and that's why I do think this is going to be a phenomenal fight no matter what the result is. I do have Movsar Evloev, but again, and I say this all the time, this is fight of the night for a reason, because Dan Ige is not just going to show up to get taken down and look for a way out. Like, he is going to try as long as there's time left on the clock.
Both of us going with Movsar Evloev in this fight, and then we get into our main event, Matt. Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
I can't believe I picked Rozenstruik.
It's like getting stood up. No, you had Volkov.
I thought I picked, oh, thank goodness.
It's like going out for dinner and getting stood up. Like, you know, let's say you have 10 dinner dates, and 5 of them you get stood up at. And I know it's not 5, it's 3, but okay.
You should probably look in the mirror and start asking yourself why so many people are flaking on you.
5 dinner dates, 3 of them you get stood up on. But those other 2, they were so damn good that it just brings you back to the same restaurant, and you sit there and you wait all night, and then it doesn't happen. I'm like, well, I'm getting back up on the horse again. That's what it's like watching Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight. Because you know that something electric can happen. You know you can get sparks. Or, it is what it is. Now, again, this fight against Curtis Blades, a little bit of a wrinkle here and there. It wasn't that bad, although he did lose the fight. But when you look at the Gon fight, or you look at the fight against...
I knew I had Rozenstruik at the start of the week.
The fight against Ngannou, it's one of those ones where you go, well, geez. I don't know. So, Matt, I do look at this fight, and it's interesting because Volkov, again, his last time out, he didn't look like the Volkov that we're used to at all. He looked very, very flat, which is kind of one part Volkov, but also one part Tom Aspinall because of how good he is in a spat with Chael Sonnen, which has gone on for way too long. But, Matt, when I do look at this fight, and I consider career consistency, That's why I like Alexander Volkov, and I like his level of activity that we normally see on the feet. But again, Aspinall-Tybura fight, doubts in my mind.
That's the problem. We have not seen the best version of Alexander Volkov in a hot minute now. He didn't look great against Curtis Blades. He looked really good against Walt Harris, who, let's be honest, isn't really at this level. He looked great against Alistair Overeem, who is no longer in the UFC, and that was the fight that got him cut. So that's the thing about Volkov. If you do just isolate his last 5 fights, there is an oh, by the way, for a lot of the wins and a lot of the losses. Because, like we said for Rozenstruik, how he lost to Curtis Blades, but he had a few good moments. Same thing can be said for Volkov against Curtis Blades. He lost that 5-round fight, but you don't just look at that fight and think, wow, that was 25 minutes and nothing positive for Alexander Volkov. He looked good as that fight went on. And I do think that's going to be a strange key in this fight, because for Rozenstruik, like you said, he's not someone who will throw a lot of volume unless he really is pressed for the matter. But against a guy like Volkov, it might almost be better to stay on the outside and force him to come to you, because if you are the guy moving backwards, forcing Volkov to kind of extend his range, Volkov might meet you halfway, and he might just walk into one of your big power shots. And we know Rozenstruik hits as hard as anyone at this division. I know people love to point at the Francis windmill knockout. But the wild thing about that knockout is, hey, Francis has one of the all-time great chins, because, like, Stipe hit him with one of the cleanest right hands you've ever seen, and he immediately knocked him out with the next punch he threw. But Jairzinho did everything right. He low kicks the inside of Francis's leg to get him off balance. He hits him with a left hook on the inside, and then he goes for a right hand. Against anybody else in the world, normally they get stumbled by the low kick, they walk into the left hook, and then the right hand would stop them. Francis is just... He's built different. Exactly. Francis, as you all well know, is nothing like anything we've ever seen before, and he was able to cut through that and land his own power shots. Volkov does use his footwork a lot more, though, and I do think those inside leg kicks are going to be very important. If Volkov starts out the fight checking them, then it's going to be a long night for Rozenstruik. But if Rozenstruik can start landing some of those leg kicks and making Volkov a more stationary target, I really do think we could see a biggie boy knockout today.
And so do you still have that as a pick?
I do have Rozenstruik, and again, it just comes down to how they've looked as of late. For Volkov, I do think we are seeing sort of the twilight stages of his career, and there's nothing against that. He was such a good fighter in his prime that it's like going from All-NBA, and now you're just an All-Star. There's nothing wrong with being an All-Star, just you were once a little bit better than you were now. And for Rozenstruik, I just think he is the same fighter, win, lose, or draw. His game plan is going to be the same. It's going to look really bad until it does look good, and that's why I don't like the pick that I made. But at least I know that Rozenstruik can carry his power throughout a whole entire fight. Will still try to win a fight that he's been down a lot in. It's like Meldrick Taylor versus Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. Meldrick Taylor's winning that whole fight, gets knocked out in the last 30 seconds. I like Rozenstruik in this fight, but I don't have a lot of confidence in it.
I like Volkov in the fact that he switched up his camp, and all he did was focus on wrestling and his cardio, and he worked out with, Russian national champion wrestlers and switched camps. So I think that's a pretty darn good thing, especially if that's what's evaded you in the past, or at least in your last couple of fights. So for Volkov, I'm all in on those changes, and I would bet that the UFC is going to play at least a few of those clips during this.
Though. And I'm just trying to be devil's advocate. For Alexander Volkov, Curtis Blades couldn't even take Jairzinho Rozenstruik down. So for Volkov...
Curtis Blades wanted to show off his boxing.
But Craig, no, you don't get the point. Curtis Blades tried 4 takedowns and could not get them. Curtis Blades has been wrestling his whole entire life. Even if Volkov has been doing nothing but wrestling for the last 2 months, he will still not be at the level of wrestling that Curtis Blades was, and that's why I do think Volkov's going to have a hard time in this fight.
So we're split on the pick here, and Matt, one pick splits us throughout the entire years. Things are very close.
They are heating up.
And as we will do, and as we always do on Fight Night Picks Kicks, about 500 of you tuning in, we would appreciate the like if we haven't gotten it from you yet, but we'll start back at the bottom of the card. We'll whip it all the way back up through. We will have UFC 275 that's coming up for next weekend. But I'm away all of next week and next weekend. So there's no question mark kicks. There's no side kick for the pay-per-view card. It's just the way that the cookie crumbles.
That's just the way it is.
That's just the way it is. That's just the way that it's going to happen. But we will definitely have those videos out there for you very, very soon. The graphics are together. I've already mentioned some of the tape study that I've done. And Matt, I know we're really looking forward to it. There's like a lot of debuts and fighters coming off of losses.
I love watching Glover Teixeira fight. If I can be watching a 42-year-old eat power power shots, continue to box and choke people out. It's pretty cool to watch, and the fact that Glover has had this sort of second career resurgence later on into his career has been absolutely insane to watch. But Yuri's finally getting the biggest opportunity of his career. We know how not only talented he was, but how many accomplishments he had outside the UFC. This is your time to get the big title for the world, so it's going to be a phenomenal main event. I could not be more excited.
So, Erin Blanchfield taking on JJ Aldrich, and I've got Erin Blanchfield in this.
So do I. I like Erin Blanchfield quite a bit.
And she is a big favorite. Andreas Michailidis, Rinat Fakhretdinov. I'm taking Rinat, but it's one of the least confident picks on the card, and he's a decent favorite.
It's one of those, I have Rinat right now, but we'll kind of reevaluate his next fight. Just because I have him against Michailidis doesn't mean I'll have him in his next fight.
Popping popcorn, as they say. Molina Zhumagulov. Another sketchy one. I like Molina for the activity on the feet when it does come to that, but both guys can fight a good 3-round fight, and that's what makes it such a fun one.
And hopefully it is one of those hard fights. Hopefully this is kind of like Adrian Yanez versus Davy Grant, where it's like, hey, the younger, kind of more flashy prospect gets the win, but it wasn't an easy win at all. They had to work really hard for it. I think a performance like that would be really nice to see from Jeff Molina, but I do have him in this pick.
Better than watching like a Cody Garbrandt just starch guys and then win the belt and then get starched.
Exactly. That's the problem. When people have all these flashy wins early, you don't really know that much about them. So at some point, we do need to see you in a really tough 15-minute fight. I know Molina has had one of those in the UFC already, but against a guy like Zhalgas Zhumagulov, who's a little bit more proven against higher levels of competition, I would really enjoy a fight like that.
The guy from the Trojan commercials. So Tony Gravely's taking on Mr. Johnny Munoz, and this is a great fight. I have Tony Gravely. It's lined closely. I think it's very close. I still have Gravely, but I could see Munoz going out there and getting a submission win.
I also have Gravely, but again, for Gravely to have the most success, he's going to put himself in quite a bit of danger. So this is one of those fights that could be all one way or the other, but I still like Gravely.
You've got Mr. Benoit Saint-Denis taking on Niklas Stutz. I have Saint-Denis as 1/2 QMK parlay, and I'm going with Saint-Denis.
I'm Saint-Denis, but again, it's going to be really interesting to see how he looks at his more natural weight class, coming off of such a bad loss last time out. Hopefully this is just sort of a reevaluation for him, a chance to really get a better performance in the minds of UFC fans.
And then we have, look at that, Damon Jackson, Dan Argueta. I've got Damon Jackson in this one.
I like the leech in this.
All right, Matt, Joe Selecki, Alex Da Silva. I have Joe Selecki as the second leg of the QMK parlay. I'm eager to see Alex Da Silva. It makes me worry a little bit, but I do have Selecki here.
What could be a really fun fight, but I've got a sneaking suspicion Joe Selecki's going to make it not a really fun fight and probably get the win.
Malik Slips, first time in the live chat. Good of you to join us, Matt. We have Felice Harry Kovalkiewicz. Split on the pick, I guess?
I'm going Kovalkiewicz. She won the first one. She had the only instance where, like, you could really point to, hey, that fighter's winning these moments. So I'm going to say Carolina, but whatever you pick. You could say a draw, and I'd probably agree with you.
Fight to go the distance. I like that one. I've got Herrig. Alonzo Menafield, Ashkar Mazarov. I have the guy who's fought in the UFC for a time or two.
Or is Ashkar Mazarov even his real name? No, I have Alonzo Menafield.
Well, it's not, because he switched his name in the past.
We don't know. Nothing on his side of the screen we know for sure.
Ode Osbourne, Zarrukh Adashev. I have Ode Osbourne.
I have Zarrukh Adashev. This could be a really fun fight, I think, because both guys, they have the opportunity to get the knockout. Like you said, Osbourne is the better grappler, so you probably are going to look for him to go for a takedown, but I think this will be a fun fight. I do have Adashev.
I think that's why they put it on the main card. I don't really know where they went with this one, but Poliana Botelho taking on Karine Silva. I've got Botelho, but not a ton of confidence on it.
Karine Silva has a really big opportunity in this fight to really get her name in the minds of UFC fans, and I think against Botelho, it is not a matchup catered to her style, but if it ends early, Silva's probably going to get a dominant win, and if it goes late, we'll see what happens. So I have Karine Silva, but this should be a fun one.
Jack talking about the walkout for Karolina Kovalkiewicz. That's always fun. Her like standing with her hands
wink
behind her back. Just, the wink on the cage. That's always good. Mike Trezano taking on Lucas Almeida. I've got Mike Trezano.
I do too, but he also fought to a split decision with Joe Giannetti, and that worries me a little bit in the back of my mind. But I do still have Mike Trezano.
Years ago, Jojo. He was like right on the cusp of the UFC. Then he was supposed to have that fight against Paddy Pimblett. He couldn't make weight. We've got Dan Ige taking on Movsar Evloya. Both of us going with the man with no nickname.
But it's not going to be an easy fight, and I think that's the thing I just really want to hammer home. Like, Movsar, he's a big favorite for a reason, but Dan Ige is not just going to roll over and lose by submission in 30 seconds.
It'd be wild if he did, wouldn't it?
Oh, if he does, then he is ready to fight like the Yairs and the Josh Emmets of the world. But I think this is just such a fun fight.
And Volkov, Rozenstruik, I'm going with Drago to go back to his former glory. A man whose hairstyle has changed subtly over the years as he loses it on the top and the front. But he's getting like better comb overs, different comb overs, shaving his head. It's just always a little bit different for Alexander Volkov.
You're like E-News, just cowboy hats and hairstyles. I like Jairzinho in this matchup. He's knocked out tall guys in the past. He knows how to fight tall guys. I do think that's an important thing when you're fighting someone like Alexander Volkov. But Augusto Sakai's, 6'6" himself, so you're kind of used to punching up anyways. And for Jairzinho, it's not new for him to be the shorter guy at the heavyweight division. He has been fighting taller guys pretty much his whole entire career. He is someone who's listed as 6 feet tall, but he's fought some others.
6'2", but he's
Exactly. I have a feeling like I'd probably look him dead in the eyes, and I'm like 6 feet tall. So for Jairzinho, how tall is he? We don't know, but I do like him in this matchup. I think he can carry his power late, and I do think his lack of volume will actually help him in this fight.
Kind of like a Chris Barnett. There's no way there's shorter super heavyweights out there. If there is,
True.
they're living among us, but they're not actively fighting in MMA cages unless they're on the amateur regional scene. Probably Alaska FC. There's a bunch of 5'5" heavyweights. Alaska FC.
Probably an island fighter, too.
Weird stuff's going on, Matt. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. You've got, 14 total fights coming up today. You have a dozen coming up next weekend with UFC 275. You folks are actively out there in the YouTube community tab and in our Instagram story at Fight Night Picks voting for the thumbnail. And Matt, I have to say this before we go. I'm disappointed in everybody because they're going with just the Teixeira and Prohashka one.
I
And
like the third one.
I like the
one where it's them over top and Valentina in the middle.
I like that one too, and that it doesn't seem like everybody's on that. I think we gotta have one that has both sets of title fights, but again, that's for the people to decide.
If the co-main event is a non-title fight, then yeah, you can talk about just having the two champs, but I do agree with you. When you have 4 people fighting for a title, I feel like all 4 should probably get on the poster.
They're all fighting for a title? What is it, Battle Royale for
one
title?
No, but you have 2 people fighting for one title, 2 people fighting for another one.
Well, we'll see what happens. It should be a good card. Again, thanks everybody so much for joining in. Some big-time fights again today and tomorrow. Matt, I know we're both looking forward to them.
Yeah, we have an early card today on a Saturday, so hopefully you guys are at home or with your friends enjoying the fight day. It's going to be a good one. I'm excited for this card. I got to be honest. At the start of the week making these videos, I'm like, hey, Jairzinho, Volkov. We've seen guys like this fight before, but today I woke up and I'm like, hey, Jairzinho, Volkov. I'm really excited for this main event, so hopefully it turns into a great one. Hopefully you guys have a great day too.
Enjoy the fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say,
let's get into it.
But